I opened the door to my apartment that now had the walls lined with Mylar thermal reflective blankets in hopes of helping reflect any heat we generated. I glanced at the weather center atop of my non-functioning refrigerator, and the temperature inside had now plunged to a frosty, frigid 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Both Jim and Brian's places below me were already sub-50 temps. Jody followed nervously and quickly behind me. I asked her to retrieve the keys to Jim's all-wheel drive Nissan Juke, knowing that neither her Toyota Sentra nor my Dodge Challenger had any chance of navigating the impassable snow-covered roads. My work van was rear-wheel drive and completely useless and worthless, with 14-plus inches now on both the ground and the road. As she fumbled around looking for the keys, I turned my attention to gearing up for a potential deadly rescue mission. I grabbed my chest rig, loaded with 5 non-compliant New York State 30-round magazines. At a time like this, I really wished I had invested in some AR-500 body armor. Weeks before the solar flare would forever change the world, New York State Democrats were actually drafting a bill that would make owning body armor illegal. Crazy the lengths they would go to make sure you couldn't protect yourself. Even during the day, with the heavy, dreary, blanketing snowfall, it was extremely dark in my place. A flashlight was always a necessity, especially while preparing for such a vital and essential expedition. Jody came running back upstairs, bursting into my place, saying she couldn't find his keys. He probably put them in his pocket and took them with him, out of habit, I moaned. Doesn't he have a spare set, I asked? That is his spare set, she said. He lost the originals a few months ago while we were bike riding. Ugh, unbelievable. Can't anything go according to plan today, I groaned. Now what are you going to do, Jody questioned. I've got no choice. I'm going to have to ruck it. I had routinely took many hikes through the trails at our local park with a weighted backpack. Not just when the weather permitted either. Rain, snow, or shine, summer, spring, fall, or winter, you could find me consistently trudging the trails. Rucking 5 to 7 miles in all weather conditions requires strength, endurance, and character, and it builds it too. Fortunately, working an outside job in the dead of Western New York winters, I had a generous supply of cold weather clothing. An often overlooked prep was proper and paramount footwear. I had a $200 a year allowance at work to buy boots. 17 years on the job, and I had amassed quite the collection of steel-toed shit-kickers. Under pre-CME and normal conditions, I would have been able to jog the 1.5 miles in under 16 minutes. Today, in bitter, bleak, Arctic conditions with a driving wind and robust snowfall, that wasn't feasible. I slid my black Carhartt overalls on over a pair of sweatpants. Not exactly the perfect camo for a whiteout, I thought to myself. Chest rig strapped on over my hoodie with 180 rounds of armor-piercing green tips. I was already sweating profusely. Anxiety, tension, and agitation were taking over me. The fantasizing about being John J. Rambo during SHTF was quickly becoming a reality. A reality that was sure to be an atrocious and horrendous nightmare. My hands were shaking tremendously as I laced up my Red Wing boots. I currently looked more like someone who suffered from an essential tremor or a Parkinson's patient than I did a Lionheart of Teotihuacan. Jody noticed the shakes too, as she did her best to comfort me as I headed out the door. I slipped in 2 spare mags for my sidearm and threw the sling of my AR-15 over my shoulder before then doing my best to conceal my loadout with my Carhartt jacket. 2 things, Jody, before I venture out. Number 1, do not, under any circumstances, let anyone into this building. I don't care if it's a desperate, freezing, and starving child. It could be a bluff. It's not going to be uncommon for adults to use children to dupe and deceive others. And secondly, only contact me on the 2-way radio if it's an absolute emergency. I don't want the sound of your voice to potentially blow my cover if I'm in a threatening and treacherous situation. I will periodically check in with you and give you a status update. At 1100 hours and at 23 degrees, I opened the door to our building and set out on my rescue/extraction mission. I immediately proceeded to my work van, grabbing the last crucial commodity I required. Ice cleats to slide onto my boots. The last thing I needed was to slip and fall, blowing out an ankle, knee, or my back along my travels. Even the most insignificant injury would now be multiplied and magnified during a post-societal collapse. Over an hour since Jim and Brian had left, and many of the neighbors were still sitting idle in their vehicles trying to keep warm, scanning and listening to radio stations, despondent and hopeless that there was no sign or indication of help arriving. Brian's tire marks were already completely covered by the unrelentless and unyielding flurries. 100 feet down the road, I noticed a potential honey hole. 2 pop-up campers in the parking lot, completely buried in snow with multiple 30-pound propane tanks still sitting and attached to them. Enough capability to power our Mr. Buddy heaters for days. It was imperative and critical to always be on the lookout for possible grid-down scores. Even though I knew we were now living in a menacing and savage world, the fresh snowfall that was falling and obscuring everything it came into contact with, it brought a peacefulness and innocence to a world gone mad. As I made it out of our complex and turned left onto the main road that was a straight shot to the senior home, it was a complete whiteout. The quietness that filled the air was both eerie and reassuring. A black baklava covering my face and identity, and multiple pivotal hand warmers stuffed in my gloves, ensuring I wouldn't lose feeling in my fingers in the event I needed to squeeze the trigger. I passed the church I had casted my 2020 presidential vote at just 5 weeks ago. What a simpler time, I thought to myself. I vividly recalled standing outside at 5:50 a.m. that morning, along with hundreds of others, all while social distancing and masks were worn. Who knew it would take a catastrophic, damning, and disastrous event to finally wake the masses up and to truly open their eyes? This will be a world filled with pure evil, vile, and immoral individuals. Those who panic first will most likely be the first to die. It was a good thing the roads were obstructed and for the most part impenetrable. No vehicle would see me plodding and plowing along until they were mere feet in front of me. I estimated a fresh 4+ inches had already plummeted down this morning, and there looked to be no let-up in sight. I kept moving as fast as I could through the 1.5 feet of snow. The faster I moved, the warmer I'd stay. Grabbing the two-way radio, I called out to Jody. I was going to attempt to contact Jim again. I'm almost to the railroad tracks, I told her. Still a mile to go until I reached my destination. Jim, are you there? Do you copy? I asked. For the 3rd consecutive time, we didn't receive a response. Jody pleaded and begged me to hurry up and get there. I'm doing my best, I reassured her. I'll let you know when I have a visual on the building. Trudging and trekking through 18 inches with a rifle, sidearm, and over 200 rounds was no easy task. As I made my way across the railroad tracks, I thought I saw what appeared to be taillights of a truck off the side of the road. My brisk pace now turned into a sprint. As I got closer, I could see the vehicle was upside down, laying on its roof. I prudently pulled my pistol as I approached, ever careful to always have my safety and well-being as the top priority. I called out, "Driver, are you okay?" No answer. Again I asked, "Driver, are you okay?" I saw no footprints and the doors were still closed, indicating whoever was behind the wheel was still there. I approached from the passenger side while the vehicle was still running and saw the cracked windshield covered in blood. Reaching for the door handle, hoping to open it and determine if they were still conscious, it was locked. I peered in through the passenger side window and saw 2 lifeless bodies crumbled and contorted, now resting on the roof of the truck. I banged on the window, hoping one or both would show me a sign of life. Judging by the disarray in the road and snow, it looked like it had rolled over multiple times. With no other option, I took the butt end of my AR and proceeded to smash out the window to gain access to them. It was a male and a female, both looking to be approximately 20 to 30 years old. Blood covered the interior of the vehicle. Neither had been wearing their seatbelts and were ultimately bounced around like pinballs as the truck relentlessly rolled over numerous times. I knew immediately the female had perished as her neck had been turned past 90 degrees and was almost now facing directly behind her. The male had heavy bruising on his face, and I could see several teeth embedded into the steering wheel. I removed my gloves and checked for a pulse and couldn't feel one. Both parties were expired and had died in the accident. With no emergency services to contact, this field off the side of the road was now their final resting place. Another dejected reality of the world we were currently living in. Wherever you took your last breath at was most likely where you were going to lay in state at. Whether it was an accident, natural causes, hypothermia, starvation, or a gunshot, Armageddon showed no mercy or bias. I reached over to turn the ignition off and remove the keys. In doing so, I observed a near-full tank of fuel. 30-plus gallons of priceless and precious gasoline that could come in handy in the months to come. I had a hand siphon pump kit back at home to easily help us to drain the tank and transfer over to gas cans. A half-mile into my passage, and I had already had eyes on propane and fuel. Two treasures you could no longer purchase from a gas station or store. As I continued on down the road, now less than 1 mile from my destination, Jim, Brian, and Michael were still grappling for their own survival. The combat at the senior center was continuing to unfold. The pair of thugs were hot on Michael's tail as Jim and Brian were on the third floor deciding on whether to take cover in a residence unit or making a run for the truck where they had irresponsibly left their firearms and comms at. In choosing the latter, it would require them to either come in close contact with the would-be assassins or possibly jumping 35 feet from a tenant's balcony and hoping a generous pile of snow would break their fall. Both scenarios had a high chance of injury, let alone possible death. Before the two of them could come to a resolution, the stairwell door propelled open, and they came face to face with one of the two plunderers. He had cut them off with nowhere for Jim and Brian to retreat to, other than the dead-end hallway that was at their backs. The vulture stood, at least 6'3", a scruffy face and demonic eyes. He was a menacing mortal, armed with a Remington 870 that had been sawed off to shorter the barrel for this exact kind of exchange. With a satanic smirk, he raised a shotgun and asked if the pair had any last words. Preparatory to being able to utter a single word, and his urine was now trickling down Brian's right pant leg, the sound of a single gunshot echoed and roared out of the hallway. The bandit's body crumpled and collapsed to the floor, landing faster than the blood that was still floating aimlessly in the air. Standing behind him was Norman, a 77-year-old grizzled Vietnam veteran who did multiple tours in Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. As he holstered his Colt Detective Special, he muttered as he squinted and saw Brian's wet pants. "Don't worry, boy. We used to pee by simply letting go without unbuttoning our utility trousers back in Nam. The sheer volume of sweat pouring off us swept it away." Jim, grateful and beholden by the sight of Norm, immediately went to step over the body and embrace him, when Norman exclaimed, "Secure his weapon first before you come thank me, for Christ's sake, James. And check for a pulse. I'm pretty sure I got him square in the back of the head." Indeed he did. The thug was dead as can be, as the carpet was now saturated and stained by his blood. One of Jim's residents and card game players had saved his and Brian's life. They were both extremely lucky and fortunate the encounter had played out within feet of the veteran's apartment. With one threat eliminated, another was still on the loose 1 floor below them. Jim had Norman return to his unit, as the pair were now armed with the assailant's shotgun. The decision was now made to embark down to the ground level and recover the two-way radio and firearms from Brian's truck. I radioed Jody, telling her the 3-story independent living center was now in sight. I was within minutes of gaining entry and discovering why we had not been able to make contact with our boys. She said all was quiet at the home front, minus demoralized neighbors who were reduced to collecting snow to turn into drinking water. "Stand by," I said. "As soon as I find them and we're safe, I'll let you know." The gas station across the street had multiple shattered and blown out windows. There was a handful of vagrants continuing to loot what was left, completely oblivious to me as I approached my destination. I spotted Brian's silver metallic F-150 through the dense murky snowfall. I proceeded cautiously with my semi-auto rifle now in the ready position, no longer strung over my back. 3 inches of snow had accumulated and concealed the interior of the truck. I carefully wiped the snow from the passenger side window as I kept my head on a swivel for ever-approaching threats. With my view no longer impeded, I saw the walkie and firearms resting uselessly inside. Why the hell would they leave them here, I wondered. At least they managed to lock the door and secure them, I sarcastically thought. I turned and set my sights on the entrance of the building, began carefully walking in that direction when the automatic doors, still powered by the generators, began to open. I dropped to a knee and raised the barrel of my rifle, not knowing if it was friend or foe, exiting the residence. Lo and behold, it was my neighbors, Jim and Brian, mad dashing and scrambling as they exited the building. I whistled out and motioned to them as I removed my face covering, exposing my identity. I pointed to the truck, and as I covered them from any potential threat, the three of us took cover on the driver's side of the vehicle. "What the hell's going on, you guys?" I questioned. Brian, out of breath and gasping for air, couldn't get the words out. Jim, in much better shape, said 2 madmen stormed the building. One of the residents shot and killed one. The other is still inside with Michael, the sheriff's deputy. "What's the perp look like?" I asked. Neither Jim nor Brian could give me a positive identification. "All right, listen, you two stay out here in the truck. I'll go in and see if I can find him." Not only was I risking mortal wounds from the remaining madman, but who's to say Michael wouldn't unleash a lethal load on me, not knowing who I was? On second thought, "Jim, you better come with me to reduce the chance of being struck by friendly fire, since you know the deputy." "Stay alert out here, Brian. Things can escalate fast here and across the street at the Burn and Dairy." "Grab your sidearm you foolishly left in the truck," I told Jim. Still armed with the .870 he had acquired, we made our way inside. It looked more like an abandoned ghost town than a building housing 100-plus residents. It was quiet and empty as the tenants continued to shelter in place. Seeing functioning lighting and being inside a climate-controlled environment was surreal and dreamlike. It had been days since I had seen and felt anything like this. By now, there was a good possibility he was holed up, holding a resident hostage, I told Jim. With over 60 units and 3 floors, this could be a laborious and tedious search. Just then, we heard the perilous sound of gunfire exchange coming from the 2nd or 3rd floor. "Let's roll, Jimmy," as we ascended the stairs behind the door that was riddled from earlier gunshots. "I'll lead the way and clear what's above us. You keep your sights on anything that could be creeping up behind us." As we approached the 2nd floor, another shot rang out as the sound reverberated into the stairwell. As I slowly went to grasp the door handle to open the door, someone was already doing the same on the other side. Before I could even peer through the small window in it, hoping to identify the individual, it swung open. I did my best to hide behind it as Jim was positioned on the landing below. Barreling through the exit was the other bandit. He immediately fired a concussing and death-dealing round in Jim's direction. Not knowing if Jim was hit or not, I instantly tackled him as we both tumbled down the 8 steps onto the concrete landing. Reaching for my sidearm with my right hand, I proceeded to jam and stick both my left index and middle fingers into his eyes, temporarily blinding him. In one rapid and brisk motion, I unholstered my Glock 19 and put the barrel directly under his chin as I squeezed the trigger. With my ears ringing from what I hoped was temporary tinnitus, I didn't even hear Jim's voice asking if I was okay.